The news is now.
1 week after a deadly gas explosion in East Harlem brought down 2 apartment buildings, we are learning more about past problems with ConEd. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tamsin Fidel.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Scott Stanford. The March 12th blast killed 8 people, left more than 60 hurt. And as the investigation into exactly what happened continues, angry New Yorkers say ConEd is to blame for past tragedies. Now, those other victims of past ConEd catastrophes took to the streets today to lash out at the utility and lend a hand to those who lost loved ones in the East Harlem blast. PIX 11's Joe Massiri is in Union Square tonight, where they gathered to show their support. Joe.
Hey there, Scott. Well, all of the victims who were out here today were saying that they blame some sort of ConEd failure for a tragedy, be it a serious injury or death, whether it was a down power line, an exploding steam pipe, or just as in the case of the East Harlem explosion, a leaky gas main. For Carla and Joe Oza, the East Harlem explosion hit far too close to home. In 2007, the couple's mother reported a gas leak to ConEd, which they later found out was coming from a cast iron pipe.
And when she went back in, the house exploded.
Wednesday, the Ozas joined several other alleged victims of ConEd negligence to send their thoughts to the victims of the East Harlem explosion. Judith Bailey was burned by an exploding steam pipe in July of 2007.
My heart goes out to those who have lost loved ones and those who were hurt.
The victims, along with their lawyers, are calling on ConEd to revamp the infrastructure, including replacing century-old pipes before another explosion occurs.
I find that it's always after the fact, unfortunately, where there's this reform and people feel very strongly and adamant about how do we change this so it doesn't happen again. Jay Zimner is an attorney who has represented corporate clients in several cases against ConEd. Zimner says as the stories and lawsuits start to emerge from the rubble in East Harlem, a judge, jury, and lawyers will begin to look into ConEd's internal communications to see if the company was negligent in its response or if the utility company needs to make changes to its operating procedure. They're going to want to know how they're deciphering between the level of emergency and catastrophe that we saw in East Harlem versus the apartment sort of smell of a pilot light having gone out. In a statement, a spokesperson for ConEd told us, quote, "We're continuing to work with the NTSB to determine the exact cause of the explosion and continue to provide assistance to displaced families to help with their living expenses. But for the families of the 8 people who died in the East Harlem explosion and the Oza family, there's no comfort in knowing ConEd employees are working on the problem after a tragedy takes place."
They gave us the okay, everything was clear. We left, my children and I left the house, and before we were not even halfway down the block, her house exploded with her inside.
And the lawyers for the victims who were out here today say this shows that ConEd needs to start replacing their infrastructure, starting with those 100-year-old pipes. Now, ConEd has already started that process, and they get through about 65 miles of pipe per year. At that rate, it will take about 100 years to get to the entire city. Reporting live tonight from Union Square, Joe Massiri, PIX 11 News. Scott?
All right, Joe, and today, 3